Good afternoon, all. I understand that we have a diverse mix of students here from humanities, management, science, engineering, and perhaps even medical sciences. So, just to bring us all onto the same page, so that we are able to appreciate the topic which I am going to talk about in the next 15 minutes, let me start with a small story which I read recently on the internet. It was about two gentlemen who were working on a highway which was passing through the city. So they were one of them was digging a hole on the side of the road, and the other guy was filling it up. They would walk a distance, then the first guy would again dig a hole, and the second guy would fill it up. Now, it went on and on for quite a number of minutes and hours. So the passerbys got a bit curious. So one of them walked over to these guys and asked, what are you trying to do? I mean, you are digging and he's filling it up and then it's going on and on. What is going on? So he said, actually, there are three of us. The third guy is supposed to plant a tree, but he's on leave today. So we're just doing our jobs. Okay. With this background, let me start off with my topic on deliver to promise, or why do we fail to deliver to promise. I would look at three key aspects. If well understood during this talk, it will hold a lot of us in good stead as we move in our careers and get into management roles or roles in leadership in any industry or any work stream. The first set of people I want to talk about are the people who stand in our conference rooms or stand in our halls like these and make a commitment, make a promise. I have referred to them as sales professionals. These need not necessarily be sales professionals. It could be a bunch of scientists who are standing in front of an expert committee and trying to convince them that in the next 6 months, for the current variant of H1N1, we will develop a vaccine. Or imagine that it is a contractor who is standing in a government office with the government leadership listening to his promise to deliver a metro line in the city of Delhi or any city for that matter. What is it that they do wrong that their promises do not add up when we start to deliver? Let us understand this a bit better. As stakeholders, let me take the same example of planting the trees. The three gentlemen who were one was supposed to dig a hole, the other to fill the hole, the third guy to plant a tree. Let's take that example. Why were they doing this? Probably the city municipality or the city government or council wanted three things: reduce the air pollution, improve the greenery of the city, and give a good life to its citizens. These may be the three stakeholder needs or three stakeholder drivers. As salespeople, we are worried about which tree to plant, how many to plant, when to plant, and when will we finish planting those trees. We are completely amiss or completely out of sync with the reason why the government is putting money on the table, and those three objectives of air pollution, greenery, and a good life for citizens. So the body of knowledge which is required for people who are standing in conference rooms, standing in large laboratories and making commitments or making promises, they should understand at least at the bare minimum two important topics. One is on benefits management, the other is on change management. Let me quickly explain what is the meaning of benefits management. As I mentioned, air pollution and so on and so forth were the stakeholder drivers. As a salesperson or as a contractor who is responsible for planting the trees, it is important for me to integrate these stakeholder needs and drivers as benefits. These benefits needs to be identified. These benefits needs to be validated. What do I mean by validation of benefits? Suppose the government expects from the contractor that he should plant 10,000 trees. Now, that is not physically possible because of various reasons. It could be a budget constraints, it could be the constraint in terms of timelines or the weather that will impact the work that has been envisaged by the stakeholders. So the benefits need to be validated. Some of them may have to be dropped. The third aspect is enablement of benefits, and the fourth is realization of benefits. What do I mean by enablement and realization of benefits? The goal is to plant, let's say, 10,000 trees. Usually we don't plant trees, we plant saplings, right? So once I plant 10,000 saplings, have I delivered the benefits? Not really, because the government is expecting 10,000 trees, not 10,000 saplings. So what we have done as per our promise or as per our delivery is to enable the benefits. The enablement is the saplings are there. If the government owns it, they will take care of those plants in terms of watering it, building a fence around it, so on and so forth. And in a year or two, depending on the kind of tree we are planting, it will become a tree, and then ultimately you will have those 10,000 odd trees planted. So that's the meaning of managing benefits. If you integrate this into the way you commit and make promises in a conference room, maybe you will get there. The second area is change management. Change management could impact people, could impact the process, it impact the technology or infrastructure, so to speak. So change management, in our example again, I'm taking a simple example, is the citizen should be aware that there is a lot of investment the government is putting in planting those trees. So we need to be careful. We should not, walk over it or drive our cars over it. We should be more gentle to the environment that is being created by the government. So that's the second topic. So to summarize, what I'm essentially saying is people who stand and make promises of delivering, be it a government contractor, be it a bunch of scientists who are developing a vaccine, or a software sales guy who is selling a software or a product, they need to understand the topics of benefits management and change management. Let us look at the second area on delivery. I'm sure all of us have felt this or experienced this in our day-to-day lives, of projects that were started but never saw the day of light, or they are extremely delayed. For example, take a walk in the city, you will realize there is a lot of infrastructure projects like bridges, flyovers, and metro lines which are languishing for months and years together, and we are wondering what's gone wrong. So in terms of budget, in terms of costs, and in terms of the schedule, we see significant delays or significant overruns in terms of budget that happens in projects. Why is it that this happens, and what can we do to make it successful? Why is it that when we begin the journey, there is this OMG, the oh my God, we are envisaging on something great. That OMG has to be transferred to the delivery team. And I would like to revisit the acronym as organize, manage, and govern. Creating that OMG during delivery. Now, how is that possible? So there is a bunch of body of knowledge which we should have as delivery people, and it's extremely important that we have that. The first is explaining to all stakeholders, how are we going to deliver? So when we sign a contract, let's say a government contractor signing a contract with government, or a scientist getting into an engagement and an assignment sign-off with his R&D team or R&D head and so on and so forth, those documents do not explain how we are going to deliver. So there is a need for us to create a document called a project governance plan that clearly explains how we are going to deliver to the promises we made in the conference room. Just to give an example, if I were to give you something, you will review it, you will give it back to me, I will incorporate the changes and send back the final copy for your sign off. All this takes time. The number of back and forth needs to be defined. This is what is called acceptance criteria, which is one of the aspects that is mentioned in the project governance plan. Another aspect which we should be aware of is when I am trying to deliver, let's say that same example of planting a tree, the government may say that I am expecting you to also water those saplings for the next 4 to 6 months. Now, that is not part of my job. That is not part of my scope. Right? So, how do we deal with changes that come in scope of work? That is also covered in the project governance plan, among many other topics. Moving forward, when we ask someone who is actually delivering, maybe a scientist, maybe a management guy, or maybe a software developer, if we ask them, what is the scope of work? What are you trying to deliver? They would usually start talking for number of minutes, and it is up to the receiver to understand what are they trying to say. Imagine a situation if I can say that there are 3 requirements: dig a hole, plant a tree, fill the hole. So there are 3 requirements that have to be taken care of. There is no confusion on the scope of work. So if tomorrow the government or the stakeholders ask me to build a fence around the tree, that's a change in scope that allows me to take care of it through metrics like requirement volatility. So that builds rigor in the way you are managing and delivering the projects. The third area is something which we should positively do at the beginning of any delivery projects, and that is to define the project objectives. Okay. So benefits is something which we had understood in the previous slide. This project objectives are something lower which are measurable and can be understood by the team members who are part of that project. Okay. So this document is created in the beginning of the project. And similarly, there is another important document which most of us in the industry overlook to create, and that is called the project blue book. It has 2 things: what has been done well and what has gone wrong, which is lagging indicators. And the second aspect, and this is the knowledge you leave with before you end the project, is the best practices which similar projects can inherit. So if you are building a flyover, there is a learning that has happened. If we build another flyover, let us not reinvent the wheel. Can we inherit the learnings from that project? Moving on, once we have the rigor in the way we are delivering the project, my next question is, are we on budget? How are we doing on the project? How are you delivering to the promise you made? You were supposed to deliver the vaccination in three months, or as a software developer, you were supposed to build a website in the next 6 months. How are we doing? Ask this question typically to a leader who is driving this project. Usually they will get into a monologue for 10 to 15 minutes, leaving the receiver to understand how we are doing. But there are methods available, for example, the earned value analysis, which can allow you to respond in less than 30 seconds by saying my SPI is so much, my CPI is so much. These are mathematical methods that are available for us to report the progress of projects. Last but not the least, and to summarize this slide, there is a philosophy which I have been following in all these years, something very interesting and well constructed. What it says is, this there on the extreme top, what gets measured gets improved. What gets improved gets noticed. What gets noticed gets rewarded. What gets rewarded gets institutionalized. So it gets into the DNA of all of us in terms of our work ethos. And the last topic is, all said and done, the people who are making promises, the people who are delivering are people at the end of the day, right? So what is it that we can do to equip them to ensure that they make the right promises and they do the right things to deliver as promised? So there is, what happens is, if we do not follow what we just discussed in the first 2 slides, there is chaos. There is a lot of burn that happens. People are working on weekends, people are working late hours, There is no clarity in your roles and responsibilities. This leads to a lot of frustration and people leave the organization or leave the project. So there is a need for us to equip the people who are engaged in making promises and delivering on certain topics which are very unique. The first topic which I wanted to talk about is problem solving. This is not taught, unfortunately, in any management schools I am aware of, hardly any evidence. Or if I were to take, for example, an engineering school, for example, problem management as a topic may not necessarily be taught in depth. Just to give an example, what is problem management with a simple example? This first example or the first thing which we do when we start problem management is to define the problem. That itself becomes rocket science because the definition itself is all over the place. So just to give you an example to all of you, it should look like a speedometer. That means it will have an initial speed and it will have a desired speed. So when we talk about a problem, it is addressing the gap which is there between the current state and the future state, or the current operating model and the future operating model. So there has to be a needle movement, and that movement defines the gap, and that gap is what we call the problem. And that is how we need to define the problem, which is the starting point of problem management. Similarly, many of us sitting here who may not be good, fine artists, they may not be painters, we assume that none of us had the capability to creatively imagine or do systematic innovation. We think that is not our subject. I am not imaginative or creative. Let me give you an example on how each one of us can build this, imagination. Take the example, I'm sure most of you have read Gulliver Travels, where his height, he becomes a giant, and the island where he goes, everyone is a dwarf. So basically that fantasy principle is you grow the size of that person and then it becomes a giant. Now applying that fantasy principle to real world, in the real world, Roger Federer, all of you would be aware of him, is an ace tennis player, now retired. He had a racket, he increased the size of the racket within the permissible limits and his career took off. Quickly winding up, knowledge management is another important area, needs to be tightly integrated with your appraisal system so that everyone invests some hours in sharing knowledge, some hours in gaining knowledge. And last but not the least, to summarize, let me just quote what the chairman and founder of Virgin Atlantic had said about people. Train them so well that they can leave. Treat them well enough that they won't have to. Thank you everyone. Thanks for your time.